very exciting topic. I think it's sort of famous that this is a topic, but a lot of people maybe don't know too much about the topic. This is a topic of which there are many, many books written over the last century, let's say. Perhaps most famously or importantly, I have here 2 volumes from Rabbi Shiurei Torah, Shiurei Mikvah, and then Shiurei Tzion in the back, where he really did tremendous investigative research. Obviously nowadays with the internet and archaeology and many more things we have access to that he didn't have, so there may be some adjustments, but in his time he was certainly a pioneer in groundbreaking work. Rabbi Noah was a very prominent Chabad Rav who lived in Jerusalem. He passed away, I believe, in the early 50s. So he was certainly a pioneer in this whole topic. Then another very famous, I just mentioned a couple of names of the Sfarim that I've been using. There's a very famous Rabbi Benish, who has written a sefer called Midos Shiurei Torah, which is a widely quoted sefer. There's about a 400-page sefer, 500-page sefer called Hidurei HaMidos that I've been using. I have a PDF of it. And similarly, another few hundred-page sefer called Kezayis Ranon, and many others for it. Okay, let's get to it. Everybody knows that there are many things in Torah that have to do with the Kezayis. Eating is always considered a Kezayis. And most famously is Matza on the night of the Seder. Why is that the most famous? Possibly because it is the only mitzvah nowadays which is an eating mitzvah that is of biblical nature. Back in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, Morer was also deraisa. Similarly, there were other karbonos and trumas, and there were many things that was a biblical mitzvah to eat them. Nowadays, the only biblical mitzvah that we have is to eat matzah. And of course, we know the importance of eating matzah on the night of the Seder, the bread of faith, the bread of health, and the Rabbi encouraged so much to mitzvah matzah. So we all know it's important to eat a kezayis on the night of the Seder. However, it's also important to note that all measurements in Torah, whether it's kezayis, a kebeya, this or that or the other, and similarly not just measurements of volume but also measurements of distance, are interlinked. Because, first of all, volume and distance are interlinked essentially, but even volume and weight may be at some level interlinked. But the point what I'm trying to make is that getting an accurate picture of how much is a kezayis may also affect how much is a revius. So how much do you have to drink for the 4 cups? You have to drink a revius. How much is a revius? So anybody know how much a revius is?
3 to 4 ounces.
3 to 4 ounces. That's quite a broad range. In Chabad, the accepted practice is based on Reb Chaim Noah that it is 86 milliliters, which is I think 2.9 or 3 ounces. We'll see soon that there may be other things as well. But of course, there's a lot of adjustments to be made. Today we're going to primarily focus on Kezayis, and as you can see, it's really a very broad, vast discussion. And what I want to attempt to do over the next hour or so is to just give you a highlight and a summary of the major topics involved over here. Now, the word Kezayis, what does the word Kezayis mean? It means like an olive. So if I ask you how much is a Kezayis, well, you might say that's a very strange question, because clearly an olive is an olive. Like how much is a cup? A cup is, it's not, an olive has a size, and that's the size of a Kezayis. Kezayis is like an olive. So why are you even asking me how much a Kezayis is? And indeed, there is a tshuva from the Goinim. The Goinim is the generation of Chachamim immediately post the Talmud, and there is Tshuvas HaGoinim quoted where they asked him, how much is a keseves and how much is a zayis, and anyway, and part of the response, he says to them, I don't understand. These are the measurements. The measurements are like a date, like an olive, like a. So why are you asking me to give a measurement to the measurement? That is the measurement. Like the question seems to be a bit of a strange question. And he says, if you ask me to give you a weight, well, weight is irrelevant. And this is a really important line in the Tshuvas HaGoinim. The weight is irrelevant. We're not interested in the weight of the olive or the date or whatever it is. We're only interested in the volume. And there's many other similar stories like that. Man, you could just take a tissue and wipe it or whatever. Okay. So let's get back to Now, the truth is that you might already be thinking that surely an olive is much smaller than any Kezayis you've ever seen. You go to your Seder, people give out a Kezayis, and surely that seems much bigger than an olive. So what's going on over here? And towards the end of the class today, we'll get back to that question. But I should point out that it seems, if you look through the stories, and in these Farim that I quoted before, they bring a lot of these stories, it's clear from all the Gedolei Yisrael throughout all the generations that they did not use such big Kezaysim at all. I know it's making noise. They did not. You could take a different paper from my office. They did not use such big Kezaysim at all. It seems like it was more sort of in this generation or the last two generations post the World War II that it became in style to make very big Kezaysim. I don't know why. I could conjecture that it's a combination of the fact that in general nowadays it's a generation where the style is to have more chumras, to be more strict about things. Also, it's a generation where we have Baruch Hashem affluence. So whereas once upon a time you might have had a Seder and all they could get their hands on was one matzah for everybody to share, nowadays we have plenty of matzah to go around, Baruch Hashem. And perhaps there's also some element of, in the generation after the war, a lot of people didn't have a Masorah, they didn't know what their parents or their grandparents did, and people forgot things, so they sort of had to try and, to some extent, reinvent the wheel. Whatever the case is, certainly people who were at the Rebbe's storim, who watched how much the Rebbe ate, the Rebbe definitely ate what we would, by today's norms, consider to be very small Kezaysim. So the Rebbe definitely didn't have anywhere near a half of a matzah, and probably much less than a quarter of a matzah for a Kezayis. This is also true of other Gedolei Yisrael. We're going to get back to this later, but I'll mention a couple of names, big names. There's a story of the Avnei Nezer, I think, that he took a regular, Tzachar Rebbe also, he took maybe 100 years ago, 150 years ago, he took a regular spoon and he put a third of a knedel, a third of the spoon full of a knedel, and he said, this is a Kezayis, right? Similarly, many other stories like this. Sorry, that was Reb Chaim Volozhin, not the Avnei Nezer. The Avnei Nezer was a different story, that somebody asked him how much is a Kezayis, and he showed on his finger, just basically somewhere between the end of the nail and the first knuckle. He said, that looks like an olive. Like, why are you asking stupid questions? An olive is an olive, right? Anyway, but maybe I'm getting ahead of myself over here. Let's go back to the beginning of the sugya, the way it is in halacha, and then we'll get back to this. And so, I'm going to read this to you from the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch in Siman Tov Pei Vav, which is the laws of the Seder night. This is paralleled in other poskim. I'm just choosing the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch because that's what we're choosing. Kezayis ha'amur b'chol makom. When the Torah talks about a Kezayis, we don't mean a big one. We don't need a small Kezayis. We don't need a big Kezayis. Alabeinani, we mean an average Kezayis. Zayis hanikra aguri. This Zayis is referred to as the aguri species of Zayis. So within olives, there are different subspecies of olives, and this is the aguri species, which nowadays has been basically identified beyond the shadow of a doubt over exactly which species this is. Shasham ne'og b'soicha, which is has a lot of oil in it. Now, how big is this olive? Shirei. Yeshem shukachatzi beitza. Some say that it is like half of an egg. And some say that it is a little bit less than a third of an egg. Now, who are these two's opinions? So the first opinion is Tosfos, Rabbi Tam, in three places. Now, Tosfos has a problem. As we'll see soon, Tosfos lived in the Bali HaTosfos lived primarily in the north of France, where olives didn't grow. Now, Rabbi Tam most likely never saw an olive. We could see that, and not just Rabbi Tam. If you speak to, nowadays we have imported goods and canned goods and whatever, but if you speak to people who are from Europe, from before the war, they will tell you that in their youth, they never saw olives. People who grew up in Hungary and Romania, olives was not something that was around. Now, how do we know that Rabbi Tam never saw an olive? Most likely, first of all, because he lived in places where it's not possible for olives to grow. But besides that, from this discussion that we're about to say, how Rabbi Tam, he has a whole cheshbon. How big is an olive? So he says, you see in this Gemara, it says that an olive can fit in the throat. And you see that. So he's making mathematical formulas to try and figure out how big is an olive. And he comes to the conclusion that an olive is about the size of half an egg. And when he says half the egg, by the way, he means the egg without the shell. Now, an egg without a shell is would seem to be only about 10% smaller than an egg with a shell, because there's the thickness of the shell, and also at the bottom of the egg, between the hard-boiled egg and the shell, there's like a little bubble. Lamaisa, the poskim, the Rishonim who talk about it, say that an egg without the shell is about 25% smaller. So it's unclear to me how they got to that number, but whatever the case is, Rabbi Tam is talking about half an egg without the shell, and even but other Baalei HaTosfos who have the same problems, the same contradictions in the Gemara as Rabbi Tam, come up with other formulations of how to answer the Gemara, and they don't accept Rabbi Tam's premise that that an olive is half an egg. So Rabbi Tam is one possible interpretation to fit all the Gemaras together, which we don't have the time to get into right now, where he comes to the conclusion that it's a half an egg, which is, of course, which, like we said, other Baalei HaTosfos disagree with Rabbi Tam. And by the way, another way we know that Rabbi Tam that never saw an olive was because he writes that an olive is sweet. And this that the Gemara says that an olive was bitter, he said that's the tree. The tree of he believed that the twigs of the olive tree were bitter, but the olive itself is sweet. So obviously, somebody who had seen an olive would never say such a thing. Actually, in the Indian, it's interesting to note that the same is true about pomegranates. Many of the Rishonim never saw a pomegranate, and even the Tzemach Tzedek, who was one of the biggest rabbanim in his time and wrote many tshuvas in halacha, it's clear from his tshuvas that he never saw a pomegranate, because there's many tshuvas where he's busy trying to figure out what the size of a pomegranate is, and he has a whole question he doesn't understand, because Tosfos says that a pomegranate seed is small, but how could it, if a pomegranate is a Kezayis, is a tefach, that's what it says, that the size of a pomegranate is a tefach, so how could it be that the seed is very small? So he obviously never saw a pomegranate to understand how that works. Anyway, back to the case at hand. Now, then the second opinion, so again, the first opinion that the Alter Rebbe brings is that a Kezayis is half of an egg. The second opinion is that it is a little bit less than a third of an egg. The second opinion is the Rambam's opinion. Now, the truth is, the Rambam doesn't anywhere, as far as I know, the Rambam doesn't anywhere talk about what the size of an olive is. So how do you know where do we get this third of an egg thing from? The Rambam tells you that a Kezayis agaso means a fat date. A fat date is the shir for Yom Kippur. In order to be chayiv malchus for eating on Yom Kippur, you have to eat a Kezayis agaso, the amount of a fat date. How much is a fat date? So the Rambam says a fat date is a third of an egg. Now we know, perforce from many sugyos, it comes out that an olive is less than a fat date. Right? Now, we don't know how much less, but we know that it's less. So from there we get the opinion, the Alter Rebbe says that it's a little bit less than a third. Right? So...
But the point is a little bit.
Oh, now how much less than a third? So here in the Alter Rebbe Gufa there seems to be a little bit of a contradiction, because he says it's a little bit less than a third, and then he says, okay, so how do we paskin? So Ba'atzam we paskin the Iker, the Ba'atzam, Reb Chaim Noah in his Sefer Shir Torah, Reb Chaim Noah elaborates at great length to prove that actually primarily we paskin that the lenient opinion that it's a third of an egg, and like we said, it doesn't really mean a third; it means less than a third. And that's why, for example, in Shulchan Aruch, not in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, in the regular Shulchan Aruch, in any other place where it talks about a Kezayis, like in the laws of Erevin, etc., he doesn't bring how big is an olive. Only in Hilchos Pesach, when it comes to the mitzvah Matza, does he say that Yesh Omrim, there is an opinion that an olive is the size of half an egg. Why does he bring it there? So the Mefarshim explain, because when it comes to Matzah, which is a deraisa, we want to be machmir, we want to be strict like all the opinions, so that's why the Mechaber brings that opinion. But the main halacha, and again, Reb Chaim Noah in his Sefer Shir Torah very much elaborates that really me'ikar hadin we paskin that the smaller opinion that an olive is less than a third of an egg, and only for Kezayis Matza Deiraisa do we have to be machmir. Now I'm emphasizing this because in the Mishnah Brura he says that you should be machmir even for derabbanans, even for things which are derabbanan, you should be machmir for the shitta that's like half an egg. But we certainly for Chabad, the Alter Rebbe says very clearly that only for deraisa so you machmir that it's half an egg. For the Rabbanans, we certainly paskin that it's a third of an egg. But then the Alter Rebbe finishes off, and this touches on Rabbi Marinelli's point. The Indian bracha achrona brichas hamazon. in other words, whichever way you go, there's chumras and kulas both ways. You could say, oh, you only ate this amount of matzah, it's not a kezayis, you have to eat more. But if you're going to say that's not a kezayis, but then if you eat that much, do you have to say bracha achrona? Well, maybe it is a kezayis. So it's not a chumrah to say a kezayis is bigger. In some areas, it's a chumrah to say a kezayis is bigger, and in other areas, it's going to be a kula, a leniency to say a kezayis is bigger. So that's what the Alter Rebbe finishes off here. That as far as the bracha achrona is concerned, because it's a suffix brachas lahakal, because you don't know for sure. Whenever there's a doubt of making a bracha, you err on the side of caution. So therefore, you should not say a bracha achrona until you've eaten the size of half an egg. But lachatchilu, you shouldn't get yourself into such a situation. So don't eat. Let's say if you're having a cookie, don't eat. Either eat less than a third of an egg, or eat more than a half. Don't get yourself into that twilight area where we're not sure. But so how much should you eat? So here the Alter Rebbe says, so either you should eat half an egg, or harbe pachis mishlish beitza, a lot less than a third of an egg. So whereas in the beginning he said a little bit less than a third, here he says a lot less than a third. Now we haven't yet seen anybody addressing clearly this contradiction, but let's just understand the Yesod HaDavar. Why does the Alter Rebbe say a lot less than a third?
In what context?
That you shouldn't eat, if you want to avoid the shayla of a bracha achrona, you should either eat more than half an egg volume, or a lot less than a third of an egg. Because again, no one says that in the Kezayis is a third of an egg. All the Rambam says was that a Keseves is a less than an egg, is a third of an egg, and we know that a Kezayis is less than a Keseves. Now, seems to be proof from the Gemara that it's a lot less, because in one Gemara, the Gemara refers to a Kezayis as a kol shahu, which usually means a very minute amount in comparison to a Keseves. So that's why the Alter Rebbe says harbe yoysa mikeseves, a lot less. Sorry, harbe pachis, a lot less than a third of an egg. Okay, fine. And then the Alter Rebbe finishes off, and the same is true wherever the greater, having more is a chumrah, then you should eat more like the size of half an egg. If having less is a chumrah, then eat less than the third of an egg. Okay, now let's get into what this means: third of an egg, half an egg. How does this translate? So, like we've already mentioned, we're not talking here about weight. There's basically no shitta, almost no shitta at all, that we follow Kezayis by weight. Kezayis, as most of the Shurei Torah, are measurements of volume, not of weight.
But just to clarify, the Alter Rebbe, when bringing down these halachos, he basically kind of covered his tracks. That you're basically being careful of chumrah in eating the quantity that's closer to a third.
Basically, the way I understand it, when it comes to the Rabbanon, the Alter Rebbe is going to be mekel that it's a third. When it comes to the Reises, you should be machmer. So, for example, beer chametz, you need to have a Kezayis deiraisa. Eating matzah, you should have a Kezayis deiraisa, which is half an egg. And also for bracha achrona, because suffix brachas lahaka, we go very strict.
So he's saying you have to.
But for example, for Marer, this, you know what, I'll say it already now, it's going to come up later. How many Kezaisim do we have by the Seder? So you have the Kezais of Marer, which nowadays is the Rabbanon. So for Marer, you certainly only need to have the third of an egg's worth. Right? Now, how many Kezaisim matzah do you have during the Seder? So the answer is either 3 or 4 or 5. Let me explain. You have one Kezais by the first time you eat matzah, which we call Moitzi matzah. That's one Kezais. Then you have kairach, which you need another Kezais of Marer and another Kezais of matzah. And then you have the Afikoimon, which is another Kezais. Now, when it comes to the Afikoimon, it's brought in Shulchan Aruch that lechatchilu you're supposed to have 2 Kezaisim. It's beyond the scope to explain right now why, but lechatchilu you're supposed to have 2 Kezaisim, so that if you're able to have 2 Kezaisim, then you can. So you have 4. And then there's another thing. When it comes to the first Kezais, so there's a question: do you take your first Kezais from the middle matzah or from the top matzah? So if you have your own kaira, ideally you're supposed to have 2 Kezaisim. You're supposed to put them in your mouth at the same time and swallow them together. That will have another class when we review the halachas of Pesach. We'll discuss exactly how that's practical. Obviously, in large part, it's going to depend on what we're discussing here today, which is the size of a Kezais. If you have a small Kezais, then you understand how it's possible to put them all into your mouth and swallow them in one go. If you have big Kezaisim, that's impossible to accomplish. But of all, so again, we have a maximum of 5 Kezaisim matzah for the Seder. Of all of those 5, only one of them is deiraisa, which is the first one. So the first Kezais, you have to have half of an egg, according to Alter Rebbe. For kairach and afikoyman, according to Alter Rebbe, you only need to have a third of an egg. Plus, even if you want to have a half of an egg for the first Kezais, that's only if you're having one Kezayis. But if you're having two Kezayisim, because you have your own Kaira and you're taking one from the middle and one from the top, that requirement to take one from the middle and one from the top is certainly only a rabbinic requirement. So what you could do is take a third of an egg from the middle matzah, a third of an egg from the top matzah, and together you have more than a half of an egg. So there's no need to take half of an egg from the middle matzah and half of an egg from the top matzah. Understand? Okay. In addition, I want to point out, we spoke here about everything could be a chumrah and a kula in both ways. Having big kezeisim of matzah is not only a chumrah, it's also a kula for a number of reasons. It could be a kula, I think primarily because there's a problem of eating achila gasa. If you're having such big kezeisim, when it comes to the end of a vavikoyma and you're stuffed full and you're forcing yourself to eat it, halachically, besides not being in the spirit of simchas yom tov, etc., but halachically, force feeding yourself is not considered eating. So if you have a half a matzah for moitzi matzah, two half a matzahs, because the middle and the top, and then you have a half a matzah for koirech, and another 2 half matzahs for the afikoyman, and you've had your shulchan aruch in between. By the time you're done, you're stuffing yourself full. That's achila gasa al pi halacha. That's not considered eating. So it's yotzos chari be'hafsedoi. Anything you've quote unquote gained by having lost big kezesim is lost in the fact that you're forcing yourself to eat it. Now,
the size of
we're going to get to the size. We're going to get to everything soon. Everything we're going to have exhibit. We're going to show everything hands on. It's all going to be, and I'm going to also have here my by the way, a disclaimer, sort of. Everything I say, I'm going to say in grams because most of the svarim here are written in Hebrew, which talk about grams. But I do have my gram to ounce converter right here, so we'll have everything in ounces as well. Okay. Now, again, back to where we're up to here. There's no such thing as a weight, as a Torah volume in weight. It's a measure of volume, size, narvas. Sometimes it's hard to estimate your own size because you have to have the weight. It's easier to work with the weight. I'm sorry, I missed one point which I think will make more sense to say right here, and that is that how big is it? Before we get to how big is a Kezayis, so we've brought here down 2 shittas. That a Kezayis is either a third of a half of an egg. Well, how big is an egg? So the Noda B'Yehuda, it's like he had a big problem when he was measuring for a mikveh. It didn't match up for him, because the mikveh is supposed to be a certain amount of finger breadth, and the way he was measuring fingers. By the way, does anybody remember years ago we had Rabbi Cohen from the CRC do a thing over here, and he measured people's thumbs? Yeah, remember? And, yeah. So the average came out like Reb Chaim Noah. Anyway, the Noda B'Yehuda came up with it. He had a problem with this. Okay, so he came up with this idea. And it's katnu habeitzim, that once upon a time, in the times of Chazal, the eggs would double the size the eggs are today. And by saying that, he was able to answer his problems that he had. Now, this shitta of the Noda B'Yehuda is was promoted and therefore is currently colloquially known as the shitta of the Chazon Ish.
Is it really true that Noda B'Yehuda said this because he believed that just like over time we go down in level in Limud Torah and other things, there's like these katnu adoros. He said the same thing with regard to human size. And it must be that we were bigger back then. I think that's
it. Could be, but
that was in the.
Yeah. Okay. Let's try and there's really a lot to cover. So I want to try and stay focused on the meat of it, not on all the if possible. Okay. So. So this is known today as the Shit of the Chazon Ish. Now, I'm not really going to talk very much today about the Shit of the Chazon Ish, mainly for the reason that certainly in Chabad, the Chazon Ish's opinion is not accepted at all. We accept the Reb Chaim Noah's opinion, and it's not just Chabad. Really, if you look through it, all the poskim, literally all of the poskim, accept Reb Chaim Noah's Shitta, more or less, maybe with small variances, but not the approach that nothing has changed. That the eggs today are the same size as they were once upon a time. Accept them 100%, and at the very most, the Chazon Ish is a chumrah. And what was news to me in preparing for this class is that it's brought down from reliable sources from Reb Chaim Kanievsky, who was very, very close to the Chazon Ish. It was his uncle. Now, the Chazon Ish himself didn't do it. The Chazon Ish himself had his own seder. When he distributed Kezeisim to whoever was at the table, he did not distribute Kezeisim to the size of the Shir Chazon Ish. So, again, we could talk for hours and hours about the Chazon Ish and the tremendous polemics between Reb Chaim Noah and the Chazon Ish. If you read Shur Eitzion, you could see Reb Chaim Noah was not very happy about the Chazon Ish. Everybody accepts the Chazon Ish's opinion, the Reb Chaim Noah's opinion. We have there's also besides the halacha, there's also a lot of archaeological evidence. They found in Israel in the archaeology they found pits of olives which are the same size as pits of the olives we have today. In Pompeo, which was a place I think in Italy, which was covered by ash from a volcano, so everything was preserved 100%. And they took measurements of they found whole eggs, they found scrambled, they found loads of things, and they took exact measurements. Hardboiled, yeah, everything. and nothing has changed one iota, which is very clear. Anyway,
speaking about Pompeii, I think coming to the Science Museum, there's going to be a Pompeii exhibition. I think it's like whole preserved human beings, from like.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. No Kayan and welcome. Okay.
Let's
Now-
not go to there.
All right. Now.
My father actually went to.
Okay.
Pompeii.
So 1 second. So now, yes.
Does the Chazan Ish anywhere
After the war.
indicate where in his writings, or is it just eyewitness testimony that when he gave out the matzah? Is there anywhere in his writings where he kind of indicates?
I don't know about in his writings. I don't remember offhand right now, but I could show you here. I mean, here this is Reb Chaim Kanievsky's handwriting, where he says in the name of the Chazon Ish that in practice you could use the third of an egg of nowadays eggs, and you can make a bracha achrona, no problem. So, anyway, the point is, we could talk about Reb Chaim Noah, Reb Chazon Ish another time. Today we're focusing on Reb Chaim Noah's opinion, which is, for all intents and purposes, certainly for Chabad, and even not for Chabad, is what's practically relevant. You want to be machmir, you can be machmir, like we said before, but okay. Now, people don't like to talk in volume. It's too complicated. Eat in olives. Eat 7 cubic centimeters of matzah. It's difficult for people to relate to. So we like to have weight. Now, the Torah doesn't talk in weight. The Torah talks in volume. But there's a conversion rate. You could create a conversion rate. Now, what's the conversion rate between weight and volume? So it depends on what it is. Water is 1 cubic centimeter of water weighs 1 gram, right? So, the word in English is specific gravity, or another word is relative density. But basically, this is took from Wikipedia. Relative density is a measure of the density of a substance in comparison to the density of water. So, if you take any given item, and let's say you find the given item has a density half of water, so then you'll know that a cubic centimeter of that item weighs half a gram, right? That's our barometer to measure with. Now, so the question is, we know we have to eat a Kezayis of matzah, and a Kezayis of matzah is either half of an egg or a third of an egg. Less than a third of an egg. Okay, how much is it? So Reb Chaim Noah establishes that half of an egg is 27 cubic centimeters, and the B'meila comes out that a third of an egg is approximately 17 cubic centimeters. Now, even though we don't care about a third, we need, the Alter Rebbe said, less than a third. But good, we're going to go with a third.
16.
The numbers, 16, 17, whatever it is. Reb Chaim Noah also adds, a lot of poskim add that you have to eat a little bit more than a Kezayis. You have to put into your mouth a little bit more than a Kezayis, because some parts get stuck in between your teeth, and therefore you have to add, maybe some spills out onto your thing, so you add another 2 grams, he says. Okay. Now, so, in other words, if I had to eat a Kezayis of water, I would take on a scale, put 27 grams of water, that's half an egg. If I want a third of an egg, I put in 17 grams of water, and...
How is 17 a third of 27?
No, 27 is half of an egg. An egg is, I think, according to him, 56 or 57 or 55, whatever, yeah.
And the same density?
What the same density?
Like the matzah and water.
So what? So now we have to figure out what. Very good. What's the density of matzah compared to water? Well, one way to figure it. Well, is it the same? Well, you tell me. If you put a piece of matzah in water, does it sink or does it float?
It floats.
It floats. So certainly matzah is lighter than water, obviously, right? Okay. So certainly matzah doesn't have the same density as water. Now, Reb Chaim Noah struggled very much with a number of things. First of all, he struggled with the pirush in the Mishnah. He has a whole question on the Mishnah, which the Mishnah says clearly that the holes in the given food count the natural, everything. Right? It's not solid like metal, right? There's air inside. That it counts towards the Kezayis. Chaim Noah had a question, and he goes into this whole thing where he basically comes out with a maskana, with a very shocking maskana, and this is a maskana that everybody who comes after Chaim Noah disagreed with him on. And in fact, I actually saw somewhere quoted today that Reb Chaim Noah himself backtracked from it, although I have not been able to find any evidence of that. I'm not so quick to accept that he himself changed his mind, but it's certainly a tremendous chiddush. And basically he says that the holes that are mitzaref to Kezayis are referring only, he calls them the porous, basically only microscopic holes. We're not talking about holes that you and I can see. You have to know that everything in this world has microscopic holes in it, and porous, and those microscopic holes, you don't need to be concerned, those count towards the Kezayis. There's obviously many proofs against this, but I think that the difficulty in suggesting that is self-evident. That's what the Mishnah would be referring to. Now, that's one problem that Reb Chaim Noah had, that he said you could only measure microscopic holes. Another problem was that it's very difficult to measure the density of matzah. It's just not an easy thing to measure. If you want to measure the density of banana, there's a very easy way to do it. You take a big cup of water filled to the top, you throw the banana in, you catch in a big basin all the water that spills out, and then you weigh that water, and however many if the water weighs 20 grams, then you know that the banana was 20 cubic centimeters, right? But with the matzah, it doesn't work. Matzah absorbs, matzah floats. It's a difficult thing to measure. So, Reb Chaim Noah, because of these two things, his difficulty in measuring matzah and his idea that only microscopic holes count. And there's another thing. There was a tradition, a Sephardi tradition, that the density of matzah is the same as water. That you have to have 27 grams weight of matzah. Now, whether this Sephardi, and Reb Chaim Noah, who lived in Israel, he was familiar with this tradition, and he was trying to square up the reality with that tradition. Now, it's unclear where that tradition came from. I saw today that somebody says that tradition is sourced in the Chemdas Hayomim, which is a known Sabbatean sefer, which we're not going to get into right now, but it wasn't, for many years, it wasn't known that it was a Sabbatean sefer. Whatever the case is, the exact relevance and import and influence of the Chemdas Hayomim is beyond the scope for right now.
Is it halachic?
What?
Is it an halachic work, or is it...
You never heard of Chemdas Hayomim?
No.
Oh my gosh. Okay, really not for now. It's true. Google it. It'll keep you busy for weeks. Now, but there's another thing, that the Sephardi tradition that Reb Chaim Noah was basing himself on, we're not talking about what we have today, cracker matzahs. They were having much, much thicker bread. And that bread may have in fact been, unlikely that it was the same density as water, but may have in fact been very close to the density of water. Whereas the matzah that we have today, as we'll see in a moment, is much, much, much less than the density of water. Now, what does Reb Chaim Noah...
like pita.
Yeah, but it was much heavier than pita, because pita has yeast in it, so it rises, and there's bubbles in the pita. They were talking about a bread that was thick, and it was very hard. It was
Closer to water.
So that would have been closer to the density of water. Right, now, what does Reb Chaim Noah say? Okay, tachlis, how do you do this? So he says he ground up matzah into the tiniest pieces he could possibly grind it, and then he writes this in at least 2 or 3 places that I saw. V'hichnasti b'doichek otzum. I put this into a cup and forced this doichek otzum as much with all my possible strength to thing, and b'meila I came out that in fact the density of this handmade shmura matzah that I'm holding in my hand is the same as the density of water. This is the most shocking maskana you could possibly come out with. That's what he says. Now, let's just translate before we move on from Reb Chaim.
Let me just make sure I understand. He's saying that if you take this and you crush it up and you force it into his cup, it will be the same density of water. This same, essentially,
Yeah.
the size. Okay.
Yeah.
Like a pill, right?
Yeah.
Like a messel. What's it called?
Now, Reb Chaim Noah,
consistent with the microscopic only. Right?
Yeah, Reb Chaim Noah has it's meraps and igra on so many levels. It doesn't make sense halachically. What?
What's it? Who's it?
Meraps and igra means it blows off the roof. Like there's an emoji with the head for Meraps and igra. It's a gemara. Yeah, Meraps and igra. It's a mind-boggling chiddush on so many levels. Halachically, historically, and factually, scientifically, it just doesn't make sense whichever way you cut it. But that's what Reb Chaim Noah says. Okay, so before we move on from Reb Chaim Noah, let's translate what that means in practice. So he's saying, according to him, if you're having one Kezayis, for the first Kezayis, you have to have 27 grams. If you're having 2 Kezayisim, so you're going to have 2 times 17 grams, which is 30, almost 40 grams, right? Now, and then for Afikoyman, it's 17 grams. For Koyrach, for Afikoyman is 2 times 17 grams. What's 2 times 17? It's 36, 38 grams, right?
34
grams, sorry, yeah. and for koirach also 17 grams. Okay, let's just look at this now. How much is now? People who quote Reb Chaim Noah like to say an ounce. Why do we get to an ounce? Because 27 grams is 0.95 ounce. 29 grams, so by adding 2 grams, is an ounce. Is 1.02 ounces, 1 ounce, right now. So, but in addition to his major chumrah, that matzah is the same density as water. There's another chumrah that you should add 2 grams. So you have 27 plus 29 comes to 29 grams, which is an ounce. How much is an ounce? Now, every matzah is different because it's handmade. They're not uniform. And certainly from one bakery to another, they're different. So, for example, an average Borough Park matzah, I weighed a number of them on the scale. First of all, the one way to figure it out without being so exact is you open a pound of matzah and you see how many matzahs are in there. So if there's 8 matzahs to a pound, so each matzah is going to be about 2 ounces. If there's 6 matzahs to a pound, then each matzah is going to be less. They're going to be more than 2 ounces. If there's 11 matzahs to a pound, that means they're very thin matzahs. Then they're going to be right. A Borough Park matzah weighs on average 2.5 ounces. Right? That means, so right here I have a scale. I'm going to set it to grams. And here I have 1 Borough Park matzah. Let's say this is a little bit more than a half of the matzah. I'm going to weigh this. This is 45 grams. Okay? So, let's make it smaller. 32, still too much. 31. 30, still too much.
27 or 29.
There we go. Okay, Rabbi Epstein, you're looking?
Yes, okay.
The biggest possible share, if you want to be machmir Reb Chaim Noah, plus 2 grams, so 29 grams, an ounce of matzah. In a Borough Park matzah, this is what it looks like. The biggest possible chumrah you could possibly come up with, if you're eating more than this for your Kezayis, even according to Reb Chaim Noah's biggest chumrah, you're doing nonsense.
Over.
Right? On a Borough Park matzah. Now, if you take your Rav Landau matzah, or even a square matzah, which is a little bit thinner than this, it's going to be more. But this, to me, it's a little bit more than a quarter. It's a little bit more than a quarter. It's more than a quarter, it's less than a third. Now, that's this specific matzah. The matzah next to it in the box may be a little bit thinner because they're not 100% uniform, right? There you go. This is 30 grams. Where was my other piece? This is 29 grams, right? So these 2 pieces basically weigh the same. Let's make them weigh exactly
One
the
is
same.
thinner, right?
This is 20. Okay, now I got to 28. Okay, so this matzah is a little bit thinner than this.
Yeah.
So, but you could see to have more than that. There's absolutely no basis, even if you want, unless you want to do Chazon Ish. But if you're not doing Chazon Ish, there is no basis in the world to have any more matzah than this for the first Kezayis. Now let's look at what the Afikoyim and the Koirach is going to look like.
17, right?
That's we're looking for 17?
17. There you go.
Yeah.
This is 18 grams. Okay? So this
So that you
is
need,
together.
that you need
Both
2.
together.
these 2 together. No, these 2 together for
Yeah.
So
this.
Korech, you have
So Koirach,
Yeah.
this is 18 grams.
For Korach, you need 1 Kezayis, right?
No, you need
For
2.
Koirach, you need 1 Kezayis.
1 Kezayis.
Wait.
You're not talking about Afikomen.
Koirach is the Rabbanan, right? So it's
So
1.
those matzahs that we give out that are called the Kezayis.
No, much better.
Now
They're
only needs to
huge.
be a third.
Yeah, now we're talking Kontal Rabbanis overnight.
But it's good that we give them out because if people eat them, then maybe they'll have them for Korech and Afikomen.
We're going to see soon. We're going to get much more than this. Again, this is very thick matzah. I hope my scale is accurate. Right?
Should I stand on it?
Here you go. This is 18.
I
this
weighed
is,
myself recently.
This is 18 grams of matzah. Okay, you see
That
this?
would be even a little more.
This is a little more than you need for koirach. A gram more than you need for koirach. Okay, I'm sorry for the people watching listening to the recording. You're going to have to do your own measurements. But
Just hold it up to your hand or something.
this is
Less than the size of
this
your
is
palm,
less-
your tips of your fingers.
putting it in the palm of my hand. The size for koirach of a
So
Borough
your
Park
knuckle.
matzah is from the palm, from my wrist, from the palm of my hand till about approximately my middle knuckle. Okay, that's
Right.
right.
Measure thumbs again.
Does that scale have a way of like zeroing it out before you start?
Yeah, right now, of course. Yeah, now
Oh,
it's
when you
yeah.
zero it out?
Yeah, now it's 0. Yeah, 100%. Okay, now let's move on. This is all accepting Reb Chaim Noah's tremendous premise that a matzah has the same density as water. However, obviously, like we said, that's not really the case. In fact, by the way, there's an explicit Rambam, not in the Mishnah Torah, but in Pirush HaMishnah, the Rambam writes that the density of flour is about 2/3 the density of water. Now, of course, even with flour gufa, obviously it depends if it's flour of wheat, barley, oat, etc. And even within the same type of flour, it depends how thinly it's grinded and the type of wheat. So the Rambam himself acknowledges that. And it happens to be that matzah is less than wheat, nothing but flour. But certainly it's not more than flour. So there you go. It's already much less than Chaim Noah. Okay. Now nowadays we have more sophisticated way of measuring things, and there have been numerous contemporary scholars, perhaps in some way pioneered by Rabbi Benish from Midas V'Shirei Torah, who have taken upon themselves, let's get an accurate measurement. What is the density of matzah? The relative density, I should say. And in other words, the density of matzah relative to water. And there's numerous ways to measure it. Rabbi Bodner, in his Sefer Halachas of Kezayis, published by Feldheim, which we had in the library, but I was not able to use in preparation of this year because somebody kindly borrowed it, and I don't know who or where or what, but okay, we have to get another one. But the most sophisticated way of measuring it seems to be, there's many different methods. Some people put a coating on the matzah so it doesn't absorb water. There's all different ways of doing it. But the most obvious way seems to be by something called a caliper. A caliper is a very, very exact way to measure down to the fraction of a millimeter. And with numerous testing and numerous measuring, there is a spectrum from the various experts today of how much is the density of a matzah, the relative density of matzah, as low as possibly 0.3% the density of water. But your average, Rabbi Benish, basically comes out, it's about half, maybe a little bit more than half, 0.55%. It also depends, it's a little bit different with hand matzah and machine matzah. Today I'm basically only talking about hand matzah. Machine matzah, I think, has a little bit of a... it's different. Machine matzah is different, and it's also harder to measure machine matzah because it has those like one up, one down, whatever the case is, right? So if we are to say, is everybody looking? If we are to say that... if we were to accept this basic measurement, let's go a little bit l'chumra. Instead of saying that it's half of the density of water, let's say that it's 0.55. We'll add a little bit just for good measure. Or we could even go to 0.6, okay? So according to that, a half of an egg, so 27 cubic, if you want to know how much does matzah weigh, so 27 cubic centimeters is a half of an egg. How much is that in the weight of matzah? 27 divided by 0.55. What's 27? Somebody pull out a calculator. What is 27 divided by 0.55? And what is 17 divided by 0.55?
27 divided by 0.55 is 49.
No, by 0.55.
0.55.
I'm sorry, the other way around. 0.55 divided by 27.
Is 11,540s.
Divided by 27?
Yeah.
0.02.
So I'm doing it wrong then. The formula, I'll tell you the formula. It's multiply. Yes, that's what it is. It's 0.55 times 27. Okay, I'm sorry. 0.55 times 27.
14.85.
14.85. So let's call that 15 grams, okay? So for your Kezayis deraisa, that's half of an egg. For your first Kezayis, everybody looking? You need how many? What did we say? 14?
14.85.
Let's add. Let's make
Really
it
15.
Let's make it 16, okay?
What are we doing? Because I got lost in this discussion.
Okay, we basically established that the actual density of matzah is approximately half of the density of water. Let's even go to Chumrah and say that it's 0.55. Okay, so we want to get, and you want to get an extra gram for that which 2 grams for stuck in between your teeth. So we're talking about 17 grams for your deraisa, for your first Kezayis, which we already showed what 17 grams look like, because before we showed that for the derabanan, but we're just going to show it again. This is 14. That's 18. Okay, so this is according to actual fact that matzah is approximately 0.5 the density of water. This is 17 grams. This is a Kezayis deraisa. For your first Kezayis, this is what you eat.
So now it's looking like our previous derabanan, right?
Yes. Now, what's a Kezayis derabanan now? So what's 0.55 times 17? Because we're going now to a third of an egg.
Where's my calculator?
0.55.
There you go.
Tell me again. What are we doing?
0.55 times
9.3.
times 17.
9.35.
So now we need 10 grams. Okay, you want to see what 10 grams of matzah looks like? Okay,
You know,
this is your koirech.
whoa, that's the whole thing.
Wow.
So
Okay.
that's already.
This is koirech. This is 10 grams of matzah, shlish beitza. Okay, a third of an egg. Now again, nobody even said that it has to be a third of an egg. The shitta is less than a third of an egg, but like Rabbi Chaim Noah writes, we don't know how much less, so we say a third of an egg. So really it's less than this, but we say we don't know exactly how much less, so we go by this. Everybody sees how little this is. This is like, okay, I must say, I'm using Bar Park matzah, which again, Bar Park matzah is quite thick on the spectrum of handmade matzahs, but even so, it's basically the size of the palm of my hand without the fingers, just the actual palm, right? Now, we're not done yet. Yatzazoi. Nobody says, by the way, that you're not allowed to eat more than a Kezayis. A Kezayis is the minimum amount you have to eat. But that you can eat more. There's no problem to eat more than that. You could, yeah. But the problem becomes when you're forcing it, and then you don't have to eat it b'chtei achilas pras, which is you try to do it in 2 minutes. To eat this in 2 minutes is not very difficult, is it? Right?
No.
You start eating this in 2 minutes. It's maybe a little bit hard, Especially you're leaning and it's uncommon, Okay. Now here, really, I'm done. Halacha l'maisa, I'm basically done. That's the end of the class. That's the reality. What you need to know. However, and here we come to the real big problem in the whole sugi. And the big problem is that, as we said before, all of the poskim who basically, if you look through the Rishonim, there are some Rishonim who say how much you have to eat the Kezayis. There are some Rishonim who say how much you have to eat the Kezayis, and how much is the Kezayis? Half of an egg, a third of an egg, this, that, yeah. What's the difference between those two? So, across the board, all of those who say that it's just the Kezayis lived in places where people had olives. So, an olive is an olive. You don't need to know what an olive is. And all of those who start telling you what it is relative to an egg, the Balei HaTosfos primarily, they all lived in places where there were no olives. To the extent that you even have a record of, I forget the name of one of the Talmidim of the Maram Rosenberg, I'm not going to look it up right now, in the interest of time, but that he traveled, later in his life he came to Eretz Yisrael and he saw what olives actually look like, and he changed his mind based on that. Says the Marshal, maybe he saw small olives, and the Gemara says, and the Chazal say that you have to have olives that are of oil. Olives that are of oil are much bigger. So Mamela, he saw small olives, but in fact that's not actually true. The olives that have oil are smaller. The olives that have bigger have less oil. That's the way it works. So you see already from the Balei HaTosfos who actually saw olives that they changed their mind. They took off the whole half an egg and a third of an egg. They just said an olive is an olive, and it's much smaller than half of an egg.
It's kind of surprising they didn't use the human eyeball as like a measurement, because most people's eyes are the same, and your eyes don't change as you grow.
Yeah, but
When you're
nobody
a
wants to
baby.
volunteer the rise.
Yeah, but everybody's got eyes. It's not like in South Africa or whatever. You're not going to have.
Well,
in fact,
in Bavel and in Eretz Yisrael, they were very familiar with olives.
right.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah, but mezzanilla
then-
olives are like huge.
No, but
And
they
then,
said
like, the little
they
thing-
said the exact species of olive you're supposed to use is Zayis Aguri, and we know nowadays what the Zayis Aguri is. It's whatever. There's a scientific name for it, which I wish I would have looked it up on Wikipedia.
From what I remember,
But it's but 1 second, I'll tell you exactly how much it is, what the name is. The Mishnah actually calls it Zayis Samrusi, and in Israel today they call it. It's the Syrian species of olives. You could read here in this. So this sefer called Zayis Ranan is a whole book on this topic, and at the end he has a summary. And he's presents. It's very funny, cute actually how he does it. He presents the summary as a conversation between himself and the olive, and he starts off by the olive asking him, how big am I? And he says, well, obviously we know that you're the size of half an egg. And he's like, what? No, I'm not. And they have this whole, and he brings in all the Rishonim and all the rayos are woven into this conversation. It's very funny. But anyway, the bottom line.
Thinner. What are you talking about?
The bottom line is now they bring many in these books they bring many proofs that obviously, like we know, that an olive is a lot less than a third of an egg, which fits with the Rambam. The Rambam never said it was a third of an egg. And it fits with the Alter Rebbe, Harbe Pochis, yeah? And it also fits with, and we also know, like we said before, they discovered pits of olives in archaeological diggings by, I think in Barakach or whatever. There are many, many rayas that the olives are much smaller than that. One of the best rayas that I like is the following. If you look, those of you who learn Rambam hopefully know this from the Rambam. One of the measurements that we used in the Beis HaMikdash was a kemitza.
Yeah.
Right, now, how many cubic centimeters do you think an average person could hold in their kometz?
How do you hold
A
something?
kometz of flour. That means he takes three. He
In these
closes his fist, but only 3 fingers close. His thumb and his pinky stay open, and whatever fits in that 3 fingers, in this hole in between the 3 fingers, that is the kemitza. That is a kometz. How many cubic centimeters are in your kometz? I think a lot less than a third or a half of an egg, right? Now, if you learn through the sugya, it comes out in the Rambam clearly. The Rambam writes explicitly in Hilchos Ma'aser Karbonos. Huri, what does the Rambam say? Okay, the Rambam says that a kometz is no less than 2 kazesim, 2 olives, right? So if you're going to take that an olive, even let's take a bit of tam shitta, the Rambam, the third of an egg shitta, right? Could anybody fit 2/3 of an egg in a kometz? It's not possible, right? Anyway, so basically, the proofs.
You could fit 2 kazesim in here?
Check.
That's the point?
Yeah. The proofs that Kezayis is actually much smaller than a third of an egg basically could be divided into 3 categories. One category is proofs from Shas, from different sugyas in Shas. You put different sugyas together, it comes out clear that actually a Kezayis is significantly smaller than a third of an egg. Secondly, there are historic proofs from archaeological and the like that the size of the olive have never changed at all. And part of those proofs are, because if you look through the Rambam, that means we mentioned before the proof of finding the archaeological, they found the pits, the archaeologists found the pits of the olives. There's many, many historical proofs. One of the historical proofs that's, I think, important to note is that throughout the Rambam's writings, whether it's in the Mishnah Torah and the Pirush HaMishnah, there's many, many places where the Rambam writes what the measurement of something is. Not just he talks about the daram, which was, I think, a coin or a weight that they had in those days, and other things like that. And he talks about the seeds of barley and the pits of dates and many, many different things that the Rambam uses to describe measures. And every single one of them matches up exactly to what we have nowadays. So in order to say that the olives used to be a third of an egg, you have to say that everything in the entire world remained the same besides olives. Olives became smaller. It seems like a very strange thing to say. By the way, he brings over here, I'm not going to get into it for too long right now, but he says, in order to say, if you want to say a kemitza has 2 kazesim, he basically proves from the whole sugya that it's relative to revius, which means that in order to say that anything changed, you couldn't just say that they used to have bigger hands. You would have to say that they had their hands with the same width as our hands, but much longer fingers. That would be the only way to make sense of if you wanted to say that an olive changed, with the kemitza being at least 2 kazesim. Okay? And then finally, there is another whole area. Again, so far there's two avenues of proof. One is proofs from Sugyas Hashas that a Kezayis is a lot less than a third of an egg. Which, when it comes to that area of proof, you have to question at the end of the day, why do the Poskim, the Alter Rebbe, and other Poskim, what do they think of those proofs? Okay, that remains somewhat of a question mark. Number 2, we have historical, archaeological, and other historical proofs that an olive is much smaller than a third of an egg. And number 3 is the fact that it's in these forums they elaborate on this, that actually it makes no difference, because even if you want to argue for whatever reason, for argument's sake, that the olives used to be bigger, that's irrelevant, because al pi Torah, when the Torah says Kezayis, what the Torah means is the olives that you have nowadays. So even if you want to accept that olives used to be bigger, that's also irrelevant. Now let's translate this into practice. In practice, 1 minute. Yes, I need your calculator out. In practice, Mendel, can I wait a second, or is it relevant to this?
You could probably wait.
Okay. In practice, what's the size of an olive? So the measurements are basically between 5 and 7 cubic centimeters. Let's err on the side of bigger, 7 cubic centimeters. What is 0. And let's even make it more than 0.55. Let's make it 0.6, just for fun. 0.6 times, what did we say? Times 7 cubic centimeters. How many grams? 4.2. So that means that really a Kezayis is this. This is a Kezayis.
Madrasa Madraban.
No, now we're saying the actual size of an olive, not not a third of an egg or a thing, right? Now that we did a bit bigger. We did 0.6 times 7. Really, an olive is some olives are even 5, and it's really 0.55. Let's do 0.55 times 5.
0.55 times 5 is 2.75.
Okay, so that's 3 grams, less than 3. This is 3 grams, right? So it's less than this. Okay.
You know, this
Now,
sounds,
one second,
bizarre,
I just
but
want-
it's not so bizarre.
It's not right, exactly. Now I want to finish. This is why I want to finish off. Lamaisa, halacha lamaisa. Let's talk halacha lamaisa. Halacha lamaisa. This is a whole sort of a whole new can of worms. What do you
Said we're
do?
finished halacha l'maisa.
I want to go back to halacha lamaisa. Lamaisa, what do you do when the ruling of Shulchan Aruch is based on something which we know historically not to be accurate, and they didn't know that? Now we know. So that's a huge topic which we can't cover right now. Traditionally, the Masorah is we follow what it says in Shulchan Aruch, and therefore, if you ask me how much should you eat a Kezayis matzah, absolutely you should eat half an egg for the Raisa and a third of an egg for the Rabbanan. And like we said before, those are very small amounts. Those are approximately 10 grams for the Rabbanan and 17 grams for the Raisa. Let's
like
just,
a
for the
third,
sake of the audio recording, let's put that into
Less than a
into
third, more than a quarter was for
in
Raisa.
according to my gram to ounce conversion calculator, 10 grams is 0.35 ounces, and 17 grams is 0.6 of an ounce, right?
And
And
an average Borough Park matzah is 2 ounces.
an average Rapoport matzah is 2.5 to 3 ounces.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I weighed them before. Again, we showed before the palm of my hand. This is a Kezayis Rabbanan according to that. Okay. Yeah, this is 9. So maybe you need this. There you go. Yeah, I mean, obviously the scale is not 100%. Right, 10 grams. And if you wanted the Raisa, then it goes like this. Okay, there you go. This is 17. Now, that's all halacha l'maisa. That's not regular halacha l'maisa. There's 2 caveats, which I don't really know what to do with these caveats, but I'm just going to mention them. One is, what do you have a person who can't? A zaka and a chayla, somebody has celiac.
Celiac,
He can't eat so much matzah. If you want him to eat this, 3 grams of matzah, you could eat that. So you can say, okay, be mekayim mitzvah deraisa, eat this. Yeah. So what do you do in such a case? Maybe b'chagoinda, somebody who's very old and it's very difficult for him to eat matzah and they could barely swallow any solids. But it's a mitzvah deraisa, good. So you give them 3 or 4 grams of matzah, and you could dip it into water also to make it soft. You can't soak it, but you could dip it a little bit to make it a bit soft. B'shas chak, and yeah, the mitzvah matzah is more important than the mitzvah. By the way, you can't dip it in the rest of Pesach. If you need to have soft matzah, you would say dip it in juice because then it's not gebrux. But for the Leila Seder, you can't dip it in juice because it has to be lechamoni, so you have to dip only in water, right? That's one question that you have. Another question so that's one practical relevance. In other words, if I see an old person and his choice is not to eat matzah or to eat 3 grams of matzah, for sure he should eat 3. Right? There's another whole area where I'm not really sure what to do with this, and that is that, like I said before, we're talking here about Kezayis and Kibbutz, but really everything is a spiral effect of this. So when I say, for example, the shir of, for example, lavud. In order for something to be lavud, it has to be less than 3 tfachim. So if you build your sukkah, and people have the straps around the sukkah, so it's made to be less than 3 tfachim in between each of the straps, right? Now, that's basically using the Reb Chaim Noah shita, that a tefach is 8 centimeters. So 3 tfachim is less than 3 tfachim has to be less than 24 centimeters, or I think it comes out be'erech 9 inches. But if really the shurim are a little bit smaller than Reb Chaim's Noah, as these people try to demonstrate, so that means that your sukkah is not kosher because you need to make it an inch less in between the straps. Right? Or you're measuring the size of a room for a mezuzah. We know that the mezuzah has to be 4 by 4 amos, which is 36 square feet, basically, right? So I had recently, I was putting up mezuzahs in a house, and there was one room which was a tiny bit too small for a mezuzah. But maybe it is 4 amos by 4 amos. So in other words, what I'm saying, and for bracha achrona, right? The Alter Rebbe says, don't eat more than, either eat less than a third of of anything that you're eating, not just on Pesach, any time of the year. Either eat more than a half of an egg, or eat less than a third, right? So do I have to be machmir not to eat, obviously matzah would be mentioned, but let's say to take 3 grams of a cookie or something that has the same density of matzah, that if I eat, I shouldn't eat more than 3 or 4 grams of it, because I'm already getting myself into a stout that maybe I have to make a bracha achrona, or not. The Alter Rebbe says don't eat less than a third. As long as I'm eating less than a third of an egg, so I'm eating only 6 grams, then that's fine. So that's a dilemma which I don't really have an answer to. There's no question that in classical poskim, nobody has changed, so to speak, in the classical poskim from a third of an egg, half of an egg. Nobody has said that we should follow the actual size of an olive. But yet, it's clear that olives hasn't changed, and there's even a story in Gemara of Rabbi Yochanan who ate 1 olive and made a bracha achrona. So clearly, 1 olive is in fact the size of, believe it or not, an olive. So that's a problem which I don't really have an answer to. Maybe there's greater minds than me that have better answers. Obviously, the authors of these Sfarim are advocating, or at least some of them are advocating, that indeed we should switch, I think, and consider 5 to 6 cubic centimeters to be a Kezayis, absolutely the Raisa, the Rabbanon, the Chumra, the Kula, and everything. But Lamaisa Nishal Zeh steht in Shulchan Aruch. So that's a little bit of a dilemma what to do with that. But I think besides the dilemmas, I've opened the floor for further research and discussion. But halacha Lamaisa, what we can take out of here is that the amount of matzah that you have to eat on Pesach is significantly less than people often say. Those matzahs that are marketed as being a Kezayis probably have approximately 4 or 5 Kezaysim each, and rabbis, and like I said before, the stories of many Gedolei Yisrael throughout the generations, including the Rebbe, who had, again, by today's quote-unquote colloquial common standards, very small Kezaysim. And like I said, there's no reason to be more machmir, and in some cases, the chumra d'osei kula. Just one caveat: there's no reason to be more machmir. I want to take back. Some people will say that at the end of the day, Reb Chaim Noah was a prominent posker. Can we follow the thing? So we should follow Reb Chaim Noah. But again, even if you want to follow Reb Chaim Noah for the Kezayis Deraisa, it's much less than a half of a. We said before, it was basically just over a quarter of a Borough Park matzah, maybe less than a third of a Borough Park matzah, and that was your biggest possible chumrah, even according to Rabbi Chaim Noah's tremendous chiddush. And even that was only for the Kezayis Deraisa. But if you're having a Kezayis Derabanan, or if you're having 2 Kezaysim for the Kezayis Deraisa, that also became of irrelevance. So I hope everybody enjoyed, and thank you for joining.